What would you say to somebody who said that the rangefinder Leica is archaic compared to an automatic exposure SLR?
Oh, I think they'd be stupid.
That was a snippet from some footage of Garry Winogrand giving an informal talk to a group of photography students and faculty at Rice University, Houston, Texas in 1977. Now, I had seen snippets from this footage in the past, but I had never seen the whole thing, but I found it recently on YouTube and watched it with great interest. I will put a link to the full video in the description box below. I definitely recommend you check it out. He speaks a lot about photography, about his process. It's interesting because at the time he was actually teaching at the University of Texas at Austin, and he doesn't seem super well equipped to explain his ideas to people. It seems like he gets kind of frustrated sometimes. I find it kind of amusing, but maybe as a teacher, he's not the best at illustrating what he's talking about. But the entire talk is really interesting to watch, but there was one thing in particular that caught my attention, and that's kind of what this video is about. But first, a little background. If you don't know who Garry Winogrand is, or was, unfortunately, he is one of the most influential, one of the most important photographers of the 20th century, especially in the realm of street photography. He was active from the 1950s through into, I think, 1984, when he unfortunately died. He started out doing ad work, freelance stuff for magazines, documentary, reportage, and then by the 60s, he had been gaining more recognition for his street photography, his own personal work. In the 70s, he was still doing his own personal work, but also teaching at various universities in the country. He's just generally regarded as one of the most important street photographers and someone who has been extremely influential in that field. And at one point during this discussion at Rice University, a student asked him a question, the question that I showed you at the very beginning of this video. And Winogrand goes off onto kind of a rant about rangefinder cameras versus SLRs. And by this point, it's 1977, the SLR had become quite popular. I think it was probably much more popular than the rangefinder as just kind of a general consumer camera. But let's watch the entire portion of the footage where he's talking about this rangefinder versus SLR debate, and then we'll talk a little bit about it. I think it's really interesting.
You talked about the view camera being, in a sense, archaic.
Yeah.
What would you say to somebody who said that the rangefinder Leica is archaic compared to an automatic exposure SLR?
Oh, I think they'd be stupid. And I can support it, of course.
Yeah, support.
Well, the SLRs, single lens reflex cameras, all right? If you're using them, first of all, with, say, 35 millimeter or 28 millimeter lenses, even 50 millimeter lenses, right? There's they put those little split images on those ground glasses, right? You know why? Because when you're using them with relatively small lenses, you can't focus them. Everything looks sharp. So they make rangefinder cameras out of them. When using them with big lenses, yeah, you can focus them. This is in focus and that's out of focus. And somehow, you buy photography annual, buy all those annuals, color annuals, and you can see all the SLR pictures. They're always done with big lenses, and there's a big blob of something out of focus, a big blob of color out of focus, and something's in focus. The fact is, you look at those viewfinders, they're not photographic tools. They're illustration tools, and they force the operator, I won't even use the word photographer, to design and make a picture. In the end, make basically an illustration. They're not photographic tools, generally speaking. When you use 50 millimeters, 35, 28, whatever, you have to use them as rangefinder cameras. They don't function as single lens reflexes. You're buying a whole lot of mechanism that you don't use if you're going to use them with small lenses. That's a fact. Look at the work done with big lenses, look at the work done with small lenses. The small lenses, they don't function as single lens reflexes. The big lenses, they're not photographic tools, generally.
Well, what about the...
So anybody who's, the argument is stupid.
Okay, but You like to look through a rangefinder and see.
I'm not discussing what I like. I'm telling
okay.
I like to try to make photographs.
Okay, you like to make photographs, but
I don't care
when
what
you
I
look
do
through a
with it.
rangefinder camera, you see everything sharp,
Right.
everything in focus. You see the world as
Right,
it is.
right.
Okay, but what's the difference between that and looking through a single lens reflex and seeing what the lens sees?
Do you hear what I said? If you let's say here, I got a 35mm lens on here. Put a 35mm lens on your Nikon, and it'll look the same. Everything's gonna look sharp. So what? Well, put a 135 on your Nikon, and on this, and it's gonna be very different. And I defy you to resist how what you see in that viewfinder will manipulate you. And it will manipulate you into designing a picture.
With a 135.
With anything with any size, right? Because this is going to be out of focus, and you're going to wind up designing a picture. And damn it, look at the pictures.
But you see something different with the 28 too.
With which camera?
With both cameras. I mean, you see
No,
something
put a
different.
28 on this and put a 28 on a goddamn Nikon. They look the same, except it's different size. But everything's in focus in both. That's why they put that goddamn rangefinder in that goddamn Nikon. That's why they put the single lens, the split image in the Nikon ground glass, because they want you to be able to focus it with a small lens, not with a big lens. You don't need it with a big lens. With a small lens, you need it, because everything looks sharp. If you try to do it on a ground glass, I know what I'm talking about. It's a fact. It looks for all intents and purposes. You take the 28mm Spiegelsuche, light viewfinder, and the Nikon ground glass, and they look the same as far as focus goes. You have to focus that goddamn thing with a rangefinder on a Nikon.
Okay, well,
with
why
a split
not-
image.
Why do you use the Leica with the 28 instead of the Nikon?
Well, I'll tell you, it's for one simple reason. I don't want to buy all that goddamn mechanism that I don't use. Mirrors bouncing and whatnot. Who needs it? If I don't need another reason, that's enough reason. Huh? You know, there's only one area where I buy things I don't need. Hi-fi equipment. There's all kinds of garbage in a hi-fi thing which I have no use for. But I can't buy it without it. All right? But with a camera, I can. I can buy it. A Leica. It doesn't have mirrors bouncing around and whatnot, which I have no use for. It's simple. The Leica is a very good machine. You know, it doesn't break down much, the whole thing. Nikon Fs are good too. But there's more machinery than you need for a lot of things. I have a Nikon F. I shoot it with a 200mm. It's a much more elegant solution than using a Visiflex with this thing. So I use it, you know. And I use it at football, where I'm physically limited where I can go. It's about the only time those things are function as photographic tools. Yeah.
Okay, so very interesting clip there of Garry Winogrand getting very, let's say, animated about his rangefinder versus SLR opinions. So if we go through it point by point, it seems like what he's trying to say is that with a rangefinder with a lens around a 28, a 35mm lens, he says even up to a 50, but a fairly small lens on a rangefinder. When you look through the viewfinder, everything is in focus because that's just how a rangefinder works. You're not actually looking through the lens. You do have a little focus patch in the middle of the rangefinder, a little rectangle, and that'll show you a ghost image. Once you put the two ghost images together, that means you're perfectly in focus. But he's also talking about how he's mostly shooting, he's doing street photography, so he's usually around f11, f8 probably, so there's a lot of depth of field. When you look through a rangefinder, you're just seeing the world. You're not seeing what the camera is manipulating you into seeing. When you have an SLR that has a 35mm lens, this happens to be a Nikon F camera as well. This has a 35mm lens on it. If you're at f11 or so, and you're focusing at around 10 feet or so, everything is going to look pretty much sharp as well. It's only if you're getting really close or focusing at something really far away. But once you're at infinity anyway, everything is going to be pretty in focus, even up to like, I don't know, where's the focus scale on this? So yeah, on this, from anywhere from around infinity to about, I don't know, 8 or 9 feet is going to look pretty sharp in this lens. But if you put on a 135, as he was mentioning, or a 200 millimeter lens on this, then you're going to have areas that are very obviously out of focus and areas that are obviously much sharper. And he's talking about that depth of field, even with a narrow aperture at f11 or f16, is going to manipulate you into taking certain kinds of pictures. And he was talking about how he supposedly can tell when looking at photographic journals which pictures were taken with an SLR with a big lens and which ones were taken with a Leica or a rangefinder. So his whole point is that if you're using a smaller lens, 28, 35 millimeter lens, you might as well use the rangefinder, because if you're using a 28 or 35 millimeter lens on the SLR, you're basically getting kind of the same experience as you would with the rangefinder, except with the rangefinder, you don't have all the extraneous things that you don't need, like mirrors, flapping, and such. So I get what he means. I don't totally agree, but obviously he knows a lot more than I do about photography. But I definitely understand when I have a 100 millimeter lens on this and I'm looking through, you're seeing through the lens, you're seeing parts that are in focus, parts that are out of focus. And even like I said, with a narrow aperture like f11, you're still getting a lot more depth of field just because of the focal length of the lens. And that does kind of manipulate you. You're seeing these blotches of color here, and oh, I'm going to focus on this, and then these parts of the frame are out of focus, these parts are in focus. It doesn't matter if you're looking at something, a mile away. It's not going to change things very much. But when you have a rangefinder like this, and you're just looking through the viewfinder, and all you're seeing is just the world, if you do want to look at that little focus patch to make sure you're doing critical focus, you often don't have to, though, because when you're out doing street photography or documentary style photography, yeah, I'm usually at f11, f8. I've got my focus scale at around 7 feet or so. And so I've got a really wide range of what's in focus, and I'm mostly just kind of framing and taking the picture. And I kind of get what he means. You're just grabbing a little slice of reality instead of making a photograph. But I thought we'd try to illustrate this a little bit. We can't really do it because we have to do it in kind of a controlled situation. We're going to do it in my apartment, and so the distances aren't really correct to judge this. But I'll just show you what it looks like looking through a rangefinder, viewfinder, and then looking through the viewfinder of an SLR. And it might slightly illustrate the point that Garry Winogrand is trying to make. Okay, let's see if we can illustrate this here. I'm going to shove my GoPro into the viewfinder of my Leica, and you should be able to see the frame lines. Those are the 35 millimeter frame lines. So we have a 35 millimeter lens on the Leica, and everything looks in focus, just like Winogrand was saying. So I'm indoors, so it's not as light as it would be outdoors, but typically when I'm out, I have the aperture at around f11, f8, somewhere like that. So there's going to be a lot of depth of field. But as you look through the viewfinder, you can see that, yes, everything does look in focus. There is the little focus patch for the rangefinder right there in the middle of the frame. And if I adjust this, you can see that little Albert the bear goes in and out of focus. There's a ghost image there, but everything else in the frame is in focus. And that's with a pretty wide lens, a 35 millimeter lens. All right, now here is my Nikon FE2. This also has a 35 millimeter lens attached. And when you look through the viewfinder, everything does seem pretty much in focus. We're at f11, f16 right now. I think it's f16. So we should have quite a bit of depth of field. And this is a short lens like Winogrand was talking about. And we are all in focus in frame, except when we're not. So if I do this to the minimum focal distance, it really gets blurry. And then I go all the way to infinity, and we're pretty good. So I can already be in focus when I'm at infinity here, even though we're not that far away. We're about maybe, 10 feet away from the teddy bear there. But that's just because we have the depth of field. So if anything, I think the point that Winogrand was making is even more accurate, because he was saying that basically if you have a 35 millimeter on an SLR or a 35 millimeter on a rangefinder, they're both going to act like rangefinders because everything in frame is going to be in focus because of that short focal distance, the depth of field, and he's mostly shooting at f11, f8, maybe f16 occasionally. So it's sort of true, but even with the 35 millimeter on an SLR, when you're out of focus, the whole frame is out of focus. And he's talking about those out of focus areas affecting the way you decide to take the shot. Now, if I were to put an even longer lens on here, we would see this even more profoundly, but I'm filming this in my apartment, so I don't know that it would be very useful, but I think you get the point. So not exactly what he was saying, because we were dealing with shorter distances here. I think at the most we were 10 feet away from the subject that we were looking at through the camera. When you're outside and you have an f11 aperture, your focal distance is around 7-8 feet. You're looking at things a little further away. Then yeah, for the most part, everything is going to seem in focus when you're looking through an SLR or when you're looking through a rangefinder. But when you put on a 200 millimeter lens or something on the SLR, then obviously you're going to notice a huge difference between the in-focus areas and the out-of-focus areas. So he's right. And who am I to say whether or not Garry Winogrand is right or not? He is right about the technical qualities of both of the cameras. Whether or not you agree with him that SLRs are pointless except for very specific situations. He was talking about when he has to do rodeos or football where he can't get very close to the subject, he'll use a 200 millimeter lens on an SLR because it's more elegant to do it that way than trying to put a long lens on a rangefinder, because you really don't see what you're looking at because the frame lines are so small in the viewfinder if you put a long lens on a rangefinder. So in his mind, that's the only reason you would use an SLR. It's not a photographic tool, except in those situations when you're trying to photograph something far away. A rangefinder, in his opinion, is a photographic tool. Yeah, whether you agree with that or not, I think the discussion is very interesting. I love how fiery he gets about it. He's just a character, that Bronx accent coming out, but very fun. I tend to think that for the kind of photography I like to do when I'm walking around doing documentary style stuff, the rangefinder is the best tool for the job. And of course, we're talking about older film cameras right now. But the SLR is very useful for, you know, close-up stuff, macro stuff, far away stuff for sure, and it's great for portraiture. It's great for everything. You could use it for everything. But personally, I kind of agree with Winogrand that for the kind of photography I like to do on a daily basis, the documentary style rangefinder works the best for me. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Definitely check out the full video. There is a link in the description box below. It's worth watching, but until next time, until we meet again, I'm your good friend Bradley. You've been the audience that's been Stuff and Things. I'll see you later.
I know what I'm talking about. It's a fact.